conversation by first reading an excerpt from the Willie Lynch letters. And I won't read it now, but what was espoused in that letter from 1712 was how to deconstruct and to dehumanize Black people. And we have to start there because that is where the root of it is, right? We're being dehumanized. As Gina mentioned, we're second-class citizens in the eyes of people of the majority, even though we are the majority, ironically. It's an primarily economic drive to keep money, to hold power, and to oppress those who try to take it from them. And so what we're seeing here in 2016 is a manifestation of structural racism, a criminal justice system designed to hold and oppress, to remove opportunity once you leave that system, to bring you back into the system, and to make money off of that same system. Beyond that, those systems are given power through the vote. I have spent 10 years of my career working to engage communities that are oppressed and are falling under this system, to engage in it, because democracy is only driven by the people who participate in it. Politicians only listen to people who are calling them. We've moved on certain issues only because of the people who are paying attention to them, the lobbyists that show up to our office. And the main solution I see in my mind is for us to engage the system and to not be suspicious of it. And that is the only way I believe that we'll be able to truly move the ball on reforming the criminal justice system and ensuring equal opportunity for all, ensuring that we have an education system that isn't based primarily on property taxes, providing mental health services for, again, disenfranchised communities of color that have been, again, systematically dehumanized for hundreds of years. Reforming housing policies so that we can live wherever we want and go to good schools and obtain a higher education. Making college more affordable so that we do go to college, we're not taking on thousands of dollars of debt just because we didn't have generations of wealth in our families. These are some of the solutions I see. This is the perspective I hope to bring to the conversation today. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So, Saeed, please enlighten us.
Well, I'm going to sort of answer your question, or start off by answering your question. Because I think it's a good frame for what I wanted to share. And when I think about racism, I think about it both as policy, or what we call structural racism, but also as practice. So that there is, while there might be fewer policies in place that are racist than 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or certainly 100 years ago, the practice is still pretty pervasive. So I want to give a little bit of personal context for my comments also. I was born in India and I was raised in Belize, which is a country in Central America, kind of tucked into Spanish-speaking countries but bordering the Caribbean. The former prime minister was of Syrian descent and the current prime minister is of African descent. And I share that with you because I think that context of growing up in a culture and a country of pluralities deeply informs the way that I approach living in this plurality and seeing both the challenges and the opportunities. So I want to talk briefly about some challenges, and then, because I'm an eternal optimist, a little bit about bright spots that I see. So in terms of this political and racial moment that we're in today, three things I would like to say. First, I keep hearing from people that it's never been this bad. The rhetoric's never been bad. Things have never been this bad. And I really take issue with that, because I think for many of you in this room, you would agree, and some of the points that Gina and Nina raised, it's always been this bad. It's just been different bad. So if you remember, in 2002, the US government instituted the special registration program for males over 16 from 25 countries to go and register. In 2003, when I was Commissioner of Immigrant Affairs, New York City passed a policy to protect confidentiality of immigration status. This policy is now in different ways being manifested as a sanctuary policy. So that was 2003, more than 10 years ago. Congressional Committee on Immigration held a hearing challenging that policy. We're still going through that. And then we can go back to Jim Crow laws and the Asian Exclusion Act. So the institutionalization of racism and the policy of racism has been around for a very long time. And so sure, there's some rhetoric that's particularly bad, but there's always been a latent and overt racism in our country. The second issue I want to raise is that of purse strings and money and who controls it. And previous speakers have talked about that. In February 2016, the New York Times published a list of donors, people who have given over $1 million to presidential candidates. And almost everyone on that list was white. Now, I did a very quick kind of anecdotal name analysis. So yes, there were a few others a few on that list who are Asian American or Latino or Muslim American, but most of the names are white, and most of them were males also. So if you think about who's giving that kind of money to presidential donors and what their concerns might be, are they thinking from the lens of people of color? Are they thinking from the lens of people who lack resources? We don't know, but until that dynamic shifts, and I think it has to go both ways. I think it has to be more people who look like us giving contributions to campaigns, but I also think the big money in politics dynamic has to change, right? So that politics is not that dependent on big money. Thirdly, I want to take us back to the comments that we've heard all through this election cycle. Mexicans as rapists, Chinese anchor babies, the database for Muslim Americans. It's true that many of us felt attacked by these comments, regardless of our ethnicity. But it's also true that when the comments were made about Mexicans, that the most vocal opponents to those comments were Latinos. That when the comments were made about the Muslim American database or the Muslim database, the most vocal voices, most vocal comments were from Muslim Americans. And I think that there is a real moment in our country now. We talk about us being a majority, but actually we're not a majority unless we're all together. So if you look at the demographics, I mean, whites as a racial group, if there is such a thing, are a majority. So unless we unify, we're not really a majority. And I think that myth is something that we really have to work on in this kind of new phase of the new American majority, if you will. So largely missing from that response and activism were those voices, joint voices that were loud enough and consistent enough to say we are in this together, and that when you attack one group, you also attack us. So just now, a few bright spots. Because it's not all doom and gloom. At the same time that we're hearing this rhetoric, some campaigns have been strategic about hiring staff and seeking surrogates who can mobilize the Asian, Latino, and Muslim communities. And this is a step up from tokenism, right? I mean, it's not far enough, but it's certainly a step up because it's a recognition that the candidates have evolved from seeing us as people who will pay for photo opportunities to people who can vote. It's not as much progress as we need. We can still work on that, but I think that shift or the shifting from cuisine and culture and food and dance to seeing us as people with issues, people who can be engaged, is an important shift and one that we need to build on. The second bright spot, and I'm so glad that Sam is here because he's illustrative of my second bright spot, which is that there are more diverse candidates on the ballot, from school board to Congress. Among those that we work with at the organization I run, the New American Leaders Project, which trains first and second generation Americans to run for office. Two of the people who are our alumni who are on the ballot this year were undocumented and benefited from the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act. Several of our candidates were, either they or their family members were on the no-fly list for several years. So I think it's really instructive that even in this negative climate, we're seeing these folks running for office, from school board to city council to state leg in places like Arizona, California, Michigan, and in Virginia where Sam is a delegate. And finally, I would say that the good news for those of us who support inclusion and equity is that we're not going away. Whether it's Black Lives Matter or Dreamers, we're no longer just shutting up and putting up. And arguably we were never shutting up and putting up. But I do think those movement voices are loud and consistent. And I think we can grow that as our numbers grow, our political savvy grows, and our courage grows. And I think, going back to an earlier point, I think one of the most dramatic ways in which we can grow our courage is to build alliances. Alliances like this one, alliances across gender, alliances across class, because again, we are only a majority until we're all doing it together.
All right, so you all brought up some